Welcome to Fix It Home Improvement, covering projects that every homeowner should know and great products for home and garden.
Hi, I'm JC, and this is where we share weekly home improvement tips. I'm here with my co-host, Cindy.
Hello, JC.
Hi, Cindy. This week we're going to talk about installing recessed lighting, and we'd like to thank Debbie Turner for liking and sharing the podcast. And I just finished rereading book 15, and Cindy did a great job on this book. And we're getting ready to send it now to the format editor, and we'll let you know when it's going to be available on Amazon.
Woohoo.
The Halo Lighting Company was founded in 1956, and they had a building in the Chicago area. Their first product was the H1 square downlight. Their H7 6-inch downlight became one of their most popular recessed lights, and it's still available today.
Exciting.
Last week we talked about the three main types of recessed lights and their features.
That was great, Tim.
You have retrofit, remodel, and new construction. This week we'll talk about some installation tips. If you have existing recessed lights and you want to update the look or improve the energy efficiency, you can change the trim kits or install an LED retrofit recessed light. If the trim around your recessed lights look dated or you've painted over them, you can remove the trim and replace it. If you have an open trim kit now, you just have a circular trim covering the hole that's made for the recessed light. You would remove the bulb and pull down on the trim to unclip the springs or squeeze together the torsion clips, and that will allow you to remove the trim. And now you can just put any type of trim kit in there that fits your housing size. So an open trim is just a piece that sits flush on the ceiling covering the drywall, and with this style trim kit you would use a wide bulb to hide the inside of the recessed light housing. Baffle trim extends up into the housing to reduce glare, and you can use a smaller bulb that sets higher in the fixture. The trim will hide the inside of the housing. Reflector trim extends up into the housing and is reflective to generate more light from your bulb. Standard gimbal trim has a socket attached to the pivoting housing to direct the light, and you'd need a recessed fixture that has a socket that will snap into the top of the gimbal housing. Or you can use an LED retrofit gimbal trim. And this has a male plug that screws into the existing socket on the fixture, and the whole LED gimbal fixture clips up into the old housing. So this is very easy to install.
How do you spell gimbal?
Gimbal. The standard LED retrofit trim kits work the same way as the gimbal LED trim kits. It's going to completely cover the inside of the housing, and it installs the same way with the torsion clips.
Okay.
If you have a housing that used springs to connect to the old trim, the tabs that catch the torsion clips may not be pulled down on the inside of the housing.
So what do you do?
So you would use a small slotted screwdriver and pry them down so it holds the torsion clips. And you're going to have two tabs on each side, or you're going to have one C-shaped bracket that you have to pry down. And then your torsion clips are held between that. And then you just push up your trim kit and it's going to hold it in place. You want to make sure that you match the size of your retrofit trim to the old housing. You want to measure the inside diameter of the housing. And check the specifications on LED lights for the color, the lumens, and the beam spread, whether you want it narrow for task lighting or wide for ambient lighting.
Okay.
In the kitchen of the house I'm in now, there's 4 recessed lights above the countertops. And years ago, a friend of mine had just started a company installing LED lights in businesses to help them bring down their electric bill. And this is back when LEDs were just becoming popular, and they were a lot more expensive. So he gave me one for free to check it out, and I really liked the look of the trim kit and the brightness of the light over the countertop and the energy savings. Now the other 3 fixtures look very dated, so I ended up buying 3 more to match, and I think it cost me a couple $100 back then. And now you can get retrofit LEDs for as low as $15. If you plan on installing new recessed light fixtures, you can use new construction housings if the joists are exposed, or if you have access from above in the attic. Or you'll be using remodel housings if you don't have access to the joists. New construction housings have mounting brackets that screw or get nailed into the joists to hold them in place. Remodel housings have a flange that catches the drywall on the face side, and they have clips that lock it in place on the back side of the drywall. LED remodel fixtures come in two main styles. One has a thin LED light with trim on the outside and clips for the back of the drywall to hold it in place. And there's going to be a cable going to a junction box that's just going to sit above the drywall. Or the LED remodel fixture has a junction box that's attached to the top of the LED. If you're adding recessed lights to a room, you want to plan on where they're going to be placed, how many you're going to need for balanced lighting, and the type of fixture. You either want general lighting, task lighting, or accent lighting, or you want to combine those. I spoke to Dan Mock from
How's he doing?
He's doing good, and he's from Mr. Sparky. He gave us some installation tips. He recommends planning ahead so you get your lights in the right spot. He says use graph paper to make a scale drawing of the room. Use a stud finder to locate and mark the joist locations. If you have attic space above the ceiling and have access to it, check if there are any obstructions like ductwork or pipes, because you want to locate the fixtures between the joists.
Okay.
A general rule for the spacing of recessed fixtures is to divide the ceiling height by 2 for your ambient lighting.
Yay, math.
So for a standard 8-foot ceiling, you would have 4 feet between the fixtures. For a 10-foot ceiling, you would have 5 feet between the fixtures. And this is usually based on 6-inch recessed lights. The Eaton Company,
Eaton,
recommends looking at the manufacturer's recommendations for the fixtures you're purchasing. They will have a value of 0.5 to 1.5, which is multiplied by the ceiling height. A fixture with a 1.5 rating in an 8-foot ceiling would have a max distance of 12 feet between the fixtures. And if you have recessed lights that are too far apart or too far from the walls, you can get shadows. And if they're too close together, you get glare or the space will be overlit.
Okay.
In the split-level home I'm in, the family room is about 27 feet long and 14 feet wide. And I removed an old-fashioned 4-foot fluorescent light fixture that was in the middle of this room when I first
that was a lot of F's.
when I first moved in, and I left 6 recessed lights. The main 4 lights are set back 8 feet from the end walls and 4 feet from the side walls. And there are 2 gimbal-style lights that are set back 3 feet from the far wall, and there's a fireplace on that back wall. So I installed 4 retrofit LEDs in the center with a wide beam. They're 1,500 lumens about each, so they're very bright. And I put in LED BR bulbs in the gimbals, and that shines on that far end, that fireplace wall. So the whole middle area and the end by the fireplace is very well lit, but it is dim on the other side that only has the recessed lights 8 feet from the end wall.
Okay.
So to make it up, I have an end table with a lamp on that side of the room. But for a room this size, I really should have 2 more recessed lights, and that room would be very well balanced.
And you wouldn't need a headlamp to read? What is a BR bulb?
Stands for bulge reflector. It's a floodlight style bulb that's rounded on top rather than flat on top like a PAR bulb. And PAR, P-A-R, is short for parabolic aluminized reflector.
Well, duh.
And R bulb is a similar style, a flood kind of style. R is for reflector. And all these terms go back to incandescent bulbs and the reflective material they used to make the bulbs brighter. A BR bulb usually extends out further from the trim to light the area in a wider beam of light, usually 90 degrees or wider, where a PAR bulb is more narrow. It's usually around 45 degrees. So you want to pick the bulb, or if you're getting an LED fixture, you want to pick it whether you want a wide beam or a more narrow beam, wide for general lighting, narrow for task lighting.
Right.
If you're comparing recessed fixtures, or if you have a recessed fixture with a socket that takes a bulb and you're changing the trim kit, look at the bulb requirements. It's going to be marked on the inside of the trim or in the specifications. One fixture I looked at said 40 watt A19, 65 watt BR30, 75 watt PAR 30, or 90 watt BR40 maximum. The letters are the shape. A, for example, is the standard bulb shape, and we talked about BR and PAR. And the number is eighths of an inch. So an A19 would be a standard shaped bulb and 19/8 in diameter. So 19/8 would be 2 3/8 in diameter. 30 would be 30/8, so 3 6/8 or 3 3/4 diameter.
That's stupid.
Mr. Sparky recommends looking at the electrical source you'll be using for your new fixtures before you begin your project. Will you be running a cable from an existing light fixture or an outlet, or will you need to run a new circuit? How many watts will the new fixtures be using, and what is on the circuit now if you're using an existing circuit? You should only load the circuit to 80% of its maximum rating. A 15 amp circuit, for example, is rated at 1800 watts. 80% of that is 1440 watts. A 20 amp circuit is rated at 2400 watts. 80% of that is 1920 watts.
All right.
If you have an electrical box in the ceiling that's connected to a switch, it's pretty easy to open that up and run a cable to your first recessed light. You're going to open up the box, you're going to connect the hot wires together, you connect your neutral wires and your ground wires, and then you would run that from one recessed light to the next recessed light. If you don't have an electrical box in the ceiling or a switch, you can run off an existing outlet, and you would run a cable to the outlet. You would have the power off. Whenever you're working on anything electric, make sure you always turn off the electric to the circuit you're working on and check it with an electrical tester. A shock under certain conditions can be deadly. If you're drawing power from an outlet, you would run a cable to the outlet, connect the hot and the neutral and the ground wires, run that cable up to a switch, and then you would run another cable up to your first recessed light. On a single pole switch, you would only be connecting the hot wires to the switch. The neutral wires would be connected under a wire connector, and then that cable would go up to your recessed light. Use the correct size wire. A 15 amp circuit uses 14 gauge wire. A 20 amp circuit uses 12 gauge wire. If you're removing a light fixture from the ceiling, you can't drywall over an electrical box with splices or live wires in it. You need to cover it with a removable cover for access, or remove the electrical box and run cables to another location where you have access.
Okay.
If you're purchasing recessed fixtures for an attic space with insulation, it needs to be rated IC for contact with insulation and AT for airtight. And that's going to reduce airflow from the living space, which could cause condensation problems. It's going to be more energy efficient. You want to get wet rated for bathrooms if you're putting the light in a shower or a tub area. And there are sloped ceiling fixtures also.
Cool.
If you're in an attic running cable, you can drill through the joist to run your cable or lay it on top of the joist. If you run the cable on top of the joist, you need to protect the cable with guard strips, usually wood on each side, at least as high as the cable, but check with the electrical inspector in your town if that's okay in your area. And when you expand your lighting or add cable to run new lights or run a new circuit, your town will require a permit. In some towns, you can do the work yourself, but it will have to be inspected for safety by a building inspector.
All right.
The International Residential Code says do not drill or notch trusses or assembled beams. Don't make holes greater than 1/3 the depth of a joist. No holes are allowed closer than 2 inches to the top or bottom edge of a joist, and no holes closer than 2 inches of any other hole or notch. And don't put any notches in the middle third of a joist span. Holes are allowed in the middle, but you can't put any notches in the middle of a joist.
Huh.
It's interesting. No notches deeper than 1/6 of the joist depth, and the length of the notch shouldn't exceed 1/3 of the joist depth. And don't make square or rectangular notches. They can start a crack.
Huh.
So they say make angled cuts when you're forming a notch. It's interesting, huh?
It's fascinating.
Yeah, so read
That's
up.
why I made all those noises.
So do your homework if you're making any holes or notches in joists. And with notches, you want to make sure you cover them with metal cable shields, and that's going to protect the wires. The recessed light will have a junction box. You're going to remove the knockout and add cable clamps to hold the cable. Non-metallic cable is used in most areas. If your town requires conduit, generally you're going to use AC flexible cable with an aluminum bonding wire. The cable is your ground path, but check what's required in your town.
Mm-hmm.
To cut your holes in the drywall, you can use a hole saw and have your drill in reverse, and that way it's going to go through the drywall much smoother. You're going to have a more precise hole, which is important if you have a remodel fixture, because that outside lip is the only thing that's catching onto the face of the drywall.
Right.
You could also use a drywall saw, but the hole is not going to be as exact.
Right.
When you run a cable into the junction box, you're going to connect the hot wires together. You connect your neutral wires and your ground wires. If you have conduit in your area, the hot wire, rather than black, can be any colored wire except white or green. Some metal boxes will have a ground screw to ground the junction box, or it will be grounded, but read the manual. If you're connecting to another light, you're going to remove another knockout and add another cable clamp, and then you're going to connect all the wires with wire connectors, hot to hot, neutral to neutral, and ground to ground. Some are going to use twist wire connectors. Some have push fit connectors.
Mm-hmm.
If you're installing remodel lights between floors, make sure you have enough space. 8 inches of clearance space is usually required by many fixtures, but check the specifications or get low clearance fixtures if there isn't enough height.
Mm-hmm.
When I spoke to TorchStar last week about recessed lighting, they suggested looking at the new smart LED fixtures that can be controlled by a smart speaker or an app on your phone. And there are also recessed lights with built-in speakers.
Mm.
And one of the recessed lights I looked at with a speaker said you can add 1 per room or up to 8 speakers per room.
Wow. Exciting.
Dimmer switches are great for recessed lights. It gives you a lot of control, but make sure if you have LED bulbs or LED fixtures that you get a dimmer that's rated for LEDs and you set the minimum load level.
Right.
If you're looking for a local electrician, you can check out Mr. Sparky at mrsparky.com. It's MisterSparky.com.
Do you have anything else to add?
We'd like to thank Mr. Sparky and TorchStar for helping us with the last couple episodes, and you can check out TorchStar at torchstar.us. It's torchstar.us.
Let's wrap this up.
You can subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review.
You can check out our home improvement videos on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement.
And you can subscribe to that as well.
You can download our ebooks, Home Improvement Solutions, What Every Homeowner Should Know, books 1 through 14 on Amazon.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating and review.
You can email us at fixitpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow Cindy on Twitter at FixItCohost, and you can follow us on Instagram, Fix It Home Improvement.
Thank you for listening.
Talk to you next week.